Hi, Janice.
Hi, Anthony.
Let's talk today about 5 unexpected consequences of retiring early. We've been talking a little bit about the FIRE movement, financial independence, and retiring early. And I think most people assume that early retirement is universally a good thing, 100%. But what are some potential unexpected drawbacks of leaving the workforce early? We're going to talk about 5 of those things today. What do you think?
So it's interesting because to me, retirement seems like it's about 100 years away. But we're in that age group where it seems like it's so far, but it's really not. And we talk about this stuff and go, is this how it is? Wait, maybe it's not. So this is a really interesting thing to talk about.
Cool. All right. So number one unexpected consequence of retiring early, it's not going to be as much happiness as you expected. And this comes from a few folks and bloggers who have done this, who have retired early. And the general feeling is, yes, of course, retirement generally makes you happier, but the increase in happiness was already priced in. So here's what that means. It's not like you won the lottery and all of a sudden, unexpectedly, you had all this money, right? That's what the lottery is, a very sudden influx of cash. Retiring early is a process. So for years, you've been building up to it. And with each, during the course of that buildup, you've been getting closer and knowing like, oh, I'm that much closer until the day that you do retire. Like, what's the difference between the day that you retire and the 2 days and the week before you retire? The happiness level is probably not that big of a spread. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. Yes. It isn't like you wake up the very first day of retirement and go, I'm retired. I'm really happy now.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a buildup for all this time. And so perhaps it's better to say that the process of getting to early retirement may increase. There may be a gradual increase in your happiness, right? It's not going to be a big bomb.
It won't be instantaneous. No instant gratification. It's going to take a tiny bit of time to get used to the new world.
And they also say that this elevated level of happiness, just a general elevated level of happiness from retiring early, that pretty much fades in 3 to 6 months, right? I can imagine that because, as human beings, we adapt to our circumstances really quickly, right? So whatever becomes normal, that's it. After a while, that's not cool anymore. That's not a thing. That's just how it is.
It's like,
So, right, yeah. I mean, do you taking an extreme example? I'm sure, that movie Castaway. After a couple of months, I mean, that was just normal, like going to your coconut tree or whatever.
right. That was just life
Yeah,
because you've adapted to what you're dealing with at that point.
that was a terrible example, but anyway.
I knew what you meant. I did.
All right. Number 2 unexpected consequence of retiring early is the identity crisis. So I think a lot of people, the thing is, many people don't realize how much of their identity is connected to their job. And it doesn't really hit them until they don't have that anymore. Right? And you may suffer from a little bit of an identity crisis for as much as 3 months, or for some folks, as long as a few years. So just take this, for example. I think this actually, at the risk of being politically incorrect, I do think this affects men perhaps a little bit more than women.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
the question, what do you do for a living? Right?
Right. We get that all the time. That's
If you
like
if
the
you don't
first question in a social situation.
right, and if you don't have an answer, or if you don't feel comfortable in your answer, that can be really I don't know, it could pull at your sense of self-worth a little bit.
Absolutely agree with you. And this is when we originally talked about retiring early, that's the first thing I think of is, wow, I've built this company, I built this business, I have this job, and it's like, oh my, it's your whole life. And then it's kind of gone. What do you tell people? That's the part that I think of when retirement's 100 years from now. But
Oh, that's a great correlate. Like when somebody starts a .com and whatever, let's say they built up some, I'm just making this up. I know this doesn't like Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And then they sell it or IPO it, and they're no longer affiliated. And then somebody asks, "Oh, hey, so what do you do?" It's not the same. It's not the same thing that I used to run this company as I
Correct.
currently run this company. Yeah. So
Correct. It's very different than saying I own a company. It's a successful company instead of at one point I owned a company and I sold it. That might be a little bit like we said, an identity crisis that you have to learn to deal with.
yeah, a little bit of a void there that needs to be filled. All right. Number 3, there's a loss of power and influence. Now, I think this deals primarily with corporate America. when you work for a company, regardless of what your actual salary is, there's a lot of I don't know if perks is the right word, but you have fancy executive titles. You know, you're not just Bob Smith, you're Vice President Bob Smith, right?
Right.
Or you're director of something relations Bob Smith. You make decisions that have potentially $1 million impacts, right? Whether or not you're going to use this vendor or not, whether or not when you're rolling out this product, you have people reporting to you. That's actually a huge thing, to go from having people seeking your advice, seeking your permission, whose jobs and livelihoods depend on your opinion of them, to none of that. You're like, the only one who listens to you is your dog now,
Yeah, you're talking to your cat on a daily basis. And yeah, so, that would be very different.
Yeah, going from that to fishing every day sounds like, like heavenly, but from what I'm reading from these folks who have gone through it, there can be this sort of unexpected loss and feeling of importance. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yes. But I think that's where it's good that we're starting to talk about this now. So you're prepared for when you do retire, you know that you're going to go through these different stages. Yeah. So you're a little more prepared for that when it comes. I mean, financial preparedness is so different than this mental stuff that you're going to have to go through.
The fourth unexpected consequence of retiring early, the loss of or the need for new motivation. So most of us, from the day we started working, whether it's in high school or college or shortly after college, I mean, we're working for money. We need money to pay the rent, to feed our kids, to feed ourselves. But once you achieve financial independence, meaning you've set yourself up so that money is just not automatically, I don't want to say, but you have sources of income that will sustain you pretty much for the rest of your life. What now? I mean, you don't want to be idle. You're going to work, but now you're not working for the highest paying job anymore because it doesn't matter anymore. What are you working for? Right?
Right.
So, yeah, please go ahead.
No. So I've heard a lot of this, the profession, I'd spent some time in law enforcement and this is kind of interesting in that perspective of the motivation. When you're in law enforcement, you want to help people and you're out there and it's a whole different world. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, it's when they retire, it's not necessarily about making the money. They maybe just want to do something different that's maybe motivated differently, making them happy differently, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So they spent their whole career doing one thing and they've retired and now it's time for something else to make them happy. Maybe their motivation isn't money, but it's, now they can spend a couple hours at the food bank each week, or, they could do something different that's motivating, but it's going to take you that time to figure that out. How do you go from two extremes?
I mean, the most public example of this, totally extreme example, but Bill Gates. You don't see him working on Windows anymore. You don't see him working on LinkedIn or Skype. I mean, he made his money in Microsoft. What does he do now with his time? He's trying to solve malaria. He's trying to solve nuclear power. He's doing other things that are not necessarily money driven. And, I'm not saying that everyone's going to retire and become Bill Gates, a philanthropist.
Right. No, but it's true because your time is now open to do that, to do something else. We're not necessarily motivations, money is your motivations. Maybe you really wanted to work at a hardware store just because
exactly
you want to.
Or try acting,
but you never
or
could.
Whatever, yeah.
Right. Yeah. You couldn't do that before because you had to work somewhere that kept up with a certain monetary, threshold. But now you can do something different that's not necessarily about money.
Yeah. So just having money no longer be the motivation can be jarring, and just be aware that's an adjustment you'll have to make. All right. The fifth and final unexpected consequence of retiring early. And this, I don't think this applies to everyone, but it's having to live within a budget. So if you're set up so that if you retire early, you might be in a situation where you need to really watch what you spend to make sure the money lasts. Maybe you're skipping a few more dinners out or foregoing some trips or travel. Maybe you even need to downsize your home. And for many folks, it's an easy decision because you're basically deciding, would I rather have a big house and be back in the rat race, or am I willing to downsize and not do that, not go back,
be done,
to work? Yeah.
and be actually retired? Yep.
So Janice, I read these essays from folks who had been through this, but I think the FIRE movement is more about not just retiring early and then somehow squeezing your last dollars into the last 40 years of your life, but rather the first part, the financial independence, is making sure that you're set up to have revenue sources, money sources, so that you're not doing that. So I don't know that this
Correct.
necessarily applies to the FIRE movement, but it's good insight.
Absolutely. No, it is. And well, living within your budget, I mean, you should be doing that anyway, even though
Yeah,
you have the
true.
steady stream. So
True.
you're just going to have to think about, you know what, now we're in a new stage of life. We have to change our budget for the stage that we're in. You've had kids. What was your budget before kids is probably very different than after kids and during kids. So now you're just in a new stage, new budget, and kind of have to adapt.
Very true. Very true. And for some it'll be a tougher adjustment than others, I guess. All right.
Yes.
So those are the 5 unexpected consequences of retiring early. We'll be talking about these retirement and career type topics going forward a little bit. Hope you're finding them helpful. Let us know on social, in the comments, and we'll talk to you again next time. Take care, Janice.
Take care. Talk soon.
Bye.